Kim Novak and Sammy Davis Jr.'s affair had an odd end. When Sammy Davis Jr. first saw Kim Novak, it was love at first sight. However, other people at the time would not be enthusiastic about this. The vocalist of the Rat Pack kept the relationship low-key for the most part because of his illicit affair that involved everybody from movie executives to gangsters. Stayed under the radar for almost 60 years. However, relationships in Hollywood are difficult to keep hidden. With paparazzi photographers everywhere and curious business managers, there was no escape from scrutiny. Once the information came out eventually, people could barely believe the outrageous tale. Female fans always adored the Rat Pack. However, in 1957, there was one specific woman who Sammy had his eye on. Suffice to say, their ensuing relationship was far from straightforward. Be mindful that Sammy Davis Jr. was not raised in a glamorous environment like Kim Novak was. He was born in Harlem, New York. However, the desire to perform was a long-held tradition in his family. Davis's mother did tap dancing, and his father was a vocalist, so as a youngster, Sammy was encouraged to be on stage. Pretty soon, he was doing shows with his other relatives. Notwithstanding, in 1943, Sammy nearly had to switch professions. He received his military draft notice for the U.S. Army to serve as a specialist entertainer doing shows for his comrades. Once he left the military, Sammy went back to doing normal performances. He reunited with the dance troupe formed by his relatives and recorded some songs under different pseudonyms. A more important career development was on its way, however. By 1959, Sammy's reputation for performing had skyrocketed. Due to the regard he was held in, he became part of the Rat Pack, alongside Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, and a few other people. The shows performed by this group are part of Las Vegas folklore. Both high rollers and tourists would rush to the Sands Vegas Hotel, wanting to hear the songs and witty retorts of the legendary stars. In 1957, Sammy spent the evening at a nightclub in Chicago called Chez Paris. After looking around the club, he saw Kim Novak, the actress, sitting close by. Straight away, he was entranced by her good looks. Back then, Kim's career was at its peak. Recently, she had a lead role in Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock. Although she criticized her own performance, other people thought she was brilliant. Kim and Sammy became acquainted at a party later on in the evening. Needless to say, they hit it off immediately. Actually, their conversations captured the attention of local journalists. It didn't take long for them to end up in the gossip columns. One journalist remarked, "Which famous performer, SD, is going out with leading woman, KN?" Everybody realized who the journalist was referring to. This publicity caught the eye of Harry Cohn, who ran Columbia Pictures. Cohn was a headstrong manager who was incredulous about this report. He was furious that Kim had hit the headlines for this reason. Cohn believed that Kim's Hollywood persona had been created by him. If she was dating a black man, he thought, she would squander everything she had worked for and his company's profits. He told Kim to end the relationship with Sammy. As well as his position as a studio boss, Cohn had links to the mob, so he was not somebody to take lightly. Nonetheless, Sammy and Kim did exactly that. They carried on seeing one another and took some amusing steps to cement their love for each other, despite the severe ramifications. For instance, when meeting at the beach house of a friend, Kim would arrive in the normal way, but Sammy would hide beneath some blankets to stop the paparazzi from seeing him. Cohn became more and more exasperated with the relationship, even sending bodyguards to prevent Sammy from going to Kim's house. These efforts were fruitless, though, so Cohn opted to take more drastic action. Sammy received a telephone call one day from Mickey Cohen, who was a crime boss. The gangster said that he had one simple thing to say to Sammy in Vegas. If Sammy did not wed a black woman within 2 days, Cohen said, he would face a brutal punishment. His goons were willing to blind him and leave him crippled. This wiped the smile off the usual jovial singer's face. Sammy realized that he needed to act, so he telephoned the vocalist Lorraine White. In the past, the pair had dated. However, now Sammy had something else to ask her. Sammy offered Lorraine the sum of $10,000 if she agreed to wed him and act like he was her husband. Once the dust had blown over, he said they'd separate and leave the entire episode behind them. Lorraine agreed, so the pair quickly held a marriage ceremony at the Hotel Sands. Cohn was happy, and as they had arranged, Sammy and Lorraine separated soon afterwards. From this point onward, Kim and Sammy both went their separate ways. The pair always remembered the good times they had together, however, and reunited for one last sentimental meeting. Sammy was succumbing to cancer in the throat in 1990 when Kim went to see him at Cedars-Sinai Los Angeles Medical Clinic. Following years of estrangement, they could bid farewell to each other properly for a final time. The Rat Pack enjoyed many benefits from doing shows in Vegas, like celebrity status, riches, and the love of millions of people. The crime and corruption that was so rife in the city, however, attracted all sorts of unsavory characters. Frank Sinatra became embroiled in this as well. Acclaimed as one of the world's greatest ever performers, Sinatra was someone that all men wanted to emulate and all women wanted to be with. However, under his charming smile and unmistakable fashion sense, some thought Old Blue Eyes had a darker side that he wanted to hide from the public. This started in the 40s, when America was engulfed in Sinatra mania. Adolescent girls went crazy over the youthful singer, and while this was happening, other people began to take an interest in him too, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI felt that Sinatra had an alarming level of influence over his audience, similar to the misplaced trust people had in Hitler during the Second World War. However, this could be a paranoid way of thinking, because he was a harmless crooner at first glance. The Bureau tried to give Sinatra the benefit of the doubt. However, soon after he was pronounced exempt from military service, a story surfaced that he had paid $40,000 to a doctor to declare him unable to serve. This caught the attention of law enforcement. However, after taking a closer look at the rumor, the FBI discovered that Sinatra's reasons for avoiding the draft, psychological problems, and a damaged eardrum were valid. Having said that, there were things about the star that still made the agency suspicious. Sinatra, from the start of his career, was surrounded by some dubious people, including senior mafia members. While Sinatra claimed not to be a gangster, his associations told another story about a person so adored. One of Sinatra's best friends was Chicago Mafia leader Sam Giansana. Reportedly, Sinatra introduced Giansana to John F. Kennedy, who was a senator at the time, to secure Union support for his presidential bid. To pay for these favors, Sinatra performed shows at nightclubs owned by Giansana. Also, Sinatra introduced Judith Campbell Exner to Kennedy. Exner was the girlfriend of Giansana, who supposedly had an affair with JFK. Reportedly, she liaised between Giansana and Kennedy when the CIA plotted to assassinate Fidel Castro with the mafia's help. However, Sinatra had further connections to the mob. FBI data records gifts from Charles and Joseph Fischetti, who were gambling bosses from Chicago. Sinatra also worked gigs for Angelo Bruno, the Philadelphia gangster, at a club in Atlantic City. Willie Moretti, his godfather, lobbied to void a 1951 agreement he had signed. In the meantime, the FBI monitored all of Sinatra's activities, like his regular meetings with Detroit gangsters Vito and Anthony Giasalone. The data they gathered didn't paint the star in a flattering light. Sam Ruffino, a retired agent for the FBI, said that he trailed the Giasalone several times per year when they traveled to collect Sinatra from the airport. Apparently, they would socialize over the weekend before his shows and afterwards. Ruffino said that the police would shut down the place virtually every night. However, Sinatra never apologized for his choice of company. He liked them, even though they were known killers and thugs. He wasn't bothered, rather he just wanted to hang out with people he got on with. For a while, nobody but the FBI paid much attention. This changed, though, when it was reported that Sinatra had been to the notorious Cuba Conference in Havana with Lucky Luciano and the Fischettis. At this point, national newspapers published stories criticizing the star and his behavior. Nevertheless, Sinatra didn't get arrested for criminal activities, although his mafia connections were not the sole thing the authorities felt threatened by. The file held by the FBI and Sinatra is packed with extra stories of dubious actions, which centered on his political views. Sinatra was a vocal proponent of liberalism and criticized discrimination and racism in public. His links to JFK were concerning to the FBI, and many in Washington believed Sinatra had communist sympathies. Certainly, Sinatra spoke in defense of people accused of having communist attitudes, particularly people in Hollywood. The First Amendment Committee, which supported directors and writers who were ostracized when communism was feared, was set up with Sinatra's help. However, the file on Sinatra did not function only as a way of collecting evidence for criminal charges. In addition, the FBI kept data about the threats of blackmail, violence, and extortion he received. Also, the FBI advised him in 1963 when Frank Sinatra Jr., his son, got kidnapped. Sinatra was aware that he was being watched by the FBI the whole time. In 1979 and 1980, he used Freedom of Information legislation to acquire a copy of his file. Although there were no consequences to this, ultimately, it shows how far the government was prepared to go to imprison Sinatra. In 2002, Gerald Myers, the historian, wrote that Sinatra's FBI file contained nothing to incriminate him. In spite of this, the FBI kept an open file on Sinatra for almost 50 years, and only closed it in 1998 when he died. Throughout this period, the Bureau gathered an amazing 2,403 pages covering everything he said and did. Although Sinatra was not the master criminal some thought he was, there have been many Hollywood stars who were not what they seemed to be. Most people remember Julia Child for her infectious personality and French cuisine. However, prior to that, the life she lived was more hazardous than any kitchen. Before becoming famous, Julia Child was Julia McWilliams. Initially, she had lofty ambitions that did not include food at all. In fact, if you had suggested to Julia when she was a youngster that she should become a chef, she would have laughed in your face. Julia was a good pupil who, after graduating from high school, enrolled in Smith College, the biggest of the acclaimed Seven Sisters colleges for women. While there, she read history and actively took part in basketball competitions and the student council. However, some big changes were on the horizon for her and the nation. When the Second World War was in full swing, Julia answered the call to serve America. She joined the Army, and her chosen branches were the Volunteer Emergency Services, or Women's Army Corps. Her ambition to complete national service faded quickly, though. Standing at 6 foot 2 inches tall, Julia surpassed the height criteria for the military. Actually, her specific reason for being rejected by the Army inspired a famous song. The Bobs are an a cappella band that wrote the song Julia's Too Tall as a tribute to her. The song lyrics mention that she's too tall for spying, but the right height for baking pies.